Welcome to the Skirted Professional Podcast, a place where women of all different walks of life come together to share their journeys and wisdom they've learned along the way. We're so excited that you're part of this community. We hope you always leave this space feeling encouraged, inspired, and a little less alone. The Skirted Professional is brought to you by C Saucy, a medical apparel company that specializes in modern scrub skirt sets for the working woman. Their goal is to give every woman the option to wear a skirt in their workplace without compromising the comfort, style, or functionality of their scrubs. You can check them out at csaucy.com. That's CSAUCY.com. All right, without further ado, let's get to today's episode. Hi, Brittany. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be with you today.
We're so excited to have you on the Skirted Professional, and we know what we see about Brittany Scott and her albums and her Battle Cry tour and other tours that you've been on as well. So we're excited to really sit down with you and hear kind of your journey to get where you're at today.
Well, it has definitely been quite a journey, and I'm sure, as everybody knows, lots of ups and downs, along the way. But it's been exciting, and I'm excited to chat about it today. So,
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we start just from the beginning and kind of tell us who you are, where you live, and then we'll get into kind of the details on how you got into the music industry and recording and putting out albums. We want to hear all about that.
yeah. So, as you said, I'm Brittany Scott, and I was born and raised in the wonderful state of Washington. So, I am from the Pacific Northwest. It is beautiful here. If you've never been, you should definitely check it out at least once in your life.
Awesome.
But my husband and I actually we live here still. We started a church in Seattle, and that's my home church. It's where I lead worship every week,
Awesome.
with just me, my keyboard, and my laptop. Most people don't realize that
Wow.
that's what it looks like for me at home. A lot of people, I think, see what happens, at youth events or on a platform or at a tour stop. And that is fun and exciting and all of that. But those are definitely moments here and there compared to the week after week
Wow.
thing. That's just me at home leading worship for our church. So, yeah, we're in Seattle, Washington. We love it here. And we've been here for, I think our church actually turns 9 in July. So we've been here a little while now. And along the way, we lived in a few other places. But thankfully, my husband's actually from Oklahoma. Thankfully, he fell in love with Washington.
Okay.
And I always wanted to come home at some point and either start a church or something, because the Northwest is pretty unchurched as far as that goes.
Sure.
And so I've always seen, the need. And thankfully, God just brought our paths together and kind of aligned what, he was calling us to do as a couple. And thankfully, that brought me back home to Seattle. So
That is so cool. And so how did you meet?
we actually met at Texas Bible College.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
We
you
met there and
came
got
more
married.
south for school, and then you met him because he was from Oklahoma.
Yes. So, I actually lived in Texas for about 3 years when I was a kid, and then we moved back to Washington. Um, but my aunt and uncle lived there, and my uncle was on the board of Texas Bible College. So when I decided to go to school, he was like, "Why don't you, come to Texas Bible College? You'll be close to family still." I was only 17, so my parents they were like, "That's a great idea. We want you to be close to family. Someone can get to you if they need to." I'm so thankful that I did. I actually funny story is I did not want to go to Bible college, which most music people you would think, yeah, you want to go, do the whole music thing and chorale tour and all of that. But I was completely happy at my church. I was already very involved in our music ministry, and I didn't wanna leave. I was like, I love doing this, I love my parents were pastoring at the time. I was like, "I love being here. I love what I'm doing. I love the people I get to work with. I do not wanna go to Bible college." And God was like, "I want you to go." And so I kinda fought for a while, and then, I finally told him. It was at a youth convention, actually, like, "Okay, God, if you want me to go, I'll do it, but I need you to make it very clear, because this is not something I wanna do."
Right, right.
And, he did. He made it very clear. Somebody actually came up to me and they were like, "Listen, I don't know why, but God told me to tell you yes. That's the only thing I have for you is yes."
Wow.
And as soon as they did, I saw myself going to Bible college. So I said, all right, I'll stop fighting and go. And when I did that, I went and I thought I'm going to stay for 2 years and then I'm coming home. I'm not dating anybody, the whole thing of like Bible colleges being bridal colleges.
Right.
I
Your
was like,
MRS
that is
degree.
not why I'm going. And literally met my husband the first semester. So,
Wow. God was like, "Ha, he's laughing while you make your plans," and
yes,
God's
he
like,
is.
"Little does she know."
Yeah.
So growing up, you were always involved in music, fell in love with it, knew that's what you wanted to do, full
Yeah.
time?
So I always tell people because a lot of times I get asked the question like, when did you know you were called? Like, how do I know if I'm called to music ministry? And I have friends that have those stories where they're like, I was standing right here at this service or at this camp or whatever, and I felt like God called me into music ministry. Surprisingly, maybe I'm not one of those people.
Mhm.
I've been involved in music all my life. I was one of those, you always hear like I was singing since I was 3. Well, I was one of those people. Embarrassingly, no. um, so I've been involved, and honestly, my parents and my pastoral leadership just have always given me opportunity. They saw a gift or a talent in me,
Sure.
and they decided to give me the opportunity to develop it and use it in the kingdom. So from the time I was a kid, I was singing in church. I would sing specials, and I don't even know, do you remember, I mean, I guess they still do them. Most people just do like youth rallies and stuff, but like fellowship meetings and
Oh, yeah.
stuff where, yeah. So I was like, I don't know, I was probably like 8, 9 years old, and I would have to carry soundtracks, cassette tapes with me
Oh, my word.
because like, we would be at a fellowship meeting and whoever was up there would just be like, "Brittany, why don't you come up and sing at 8 and 9?" And I'd have to take my little soundtrack back to the sound booth and,
Oh,
go
my
up and
word.
sing. So I just grew up doing it, I guess. So
That's
there
cool.
was, yeah, never one moment where I just felt called. I had opportunity, and really what kind of took it to the next level is, I told you we moved to Texas for a couple of years,
Yes.
and when we moved back, my parents became assistant pastors at a church, and they didn't have anybody to do music. So I was 13 at the time, and I became the piano player, and then
Wow.
pretty much just took over the music because nobody else was really doing it. So I started playing at 13, and then I started training my own little praise team out of the other young people at the church, training musicians the best way I knew how. I didn't play the drums, but I was like, I can show you what I do
Wow.
know. And so I would take my brother, my cousin down to the church and just make them play with me for hours, which they
Wow.
didn't hate, thankfully.
Sure.
um, so really there was just, when we moved back, there was a need, and I was like, hey, I might not be the best. I might not even be an adult yet.
Sure.
But I can chord through these songs. I can follow, a lead sheet or a chord chart at the time. And
Wow.
so I was like, I'll be available and do it. And because of that, I just, opportunity after opportunity came from really meeting the needs in my local church.
Wow. That is so powerful, and something you said in the beginning, it was, people see me on bigger stages now and they think that that's probably just kind of my weekly routine when really it's me, my computer, a keyboard, and a microphone. It reminds me of the story of David and how he was just a shepherd boy being faithful every day, and all
Yes.
of those events cultivated into now the greatest event that we hear about in his story with David and Goliath and what he's known for. But very few people really take into consideration the time and the effort and the disciplines and the skills that he was putting in on the hillside, watching the sheep
Yes.
and tending to the sheep. And I think that's very, very impactful to hear how your story has kind of cultivated into that same realm.
Yeah, and honestly, like you said it, the faithfulness part of it is the key. I think people wanna go from from not doing anything to being on a big platform somewhere, but God can't trust us with the big platforms if we can't prove that he can trust us and will be faithful with the
Right.
smaller platforms. And honestly, even just coming out of my mouth just, made me again realize it's not even that it's a small platform or a big platform, because
Right.
sometimes what we label as the bigger platforms are not nearly as important as what we would call the small platform of me serving in my local church every week.
Yeah.
That to me is where I make the biggest impact and is the most valuable thing that I do. The
So
rest of it
true.
is, a great opportunity and I enjoy it. And yes, people are impacted by it, but what I'm doing in my local church is the most
Yeah.
important part of what I do.
Wow, wow. I already feel the Holy Ghost in our conversation, and I hope others are being blessed by this just like I am.
Hope so.
It's a great reminder to just serve where you're planted
Yes,
and be faithful in those small things. What we consider small, but like you said, in God's eyes, that is the greatest event that you could be a part of.
absolutely.
That's very impactful. Okay, so now, okay, you go to Texas, then you move back, you're just doing what needs to be done, you're meeting those needs. Then you go to Bible college, you get great confirmation that that's what you're supposed to do. You meet your husband, first semester. Now what?
So, I didn't stay at Bible college very long. I didn't even make the 2 years because, I met him and so go to Bible college. I didn't stay for very long. I only stayed for 2 semesters actually, and they weren't even connected because I met my husband, we got married right after that, and then I went back for 1 more semester and we moved.
Okay.
So we ended up going to Oklahoma. We lived in Oklahoma for a year, which is also kind of funny because, like, we knew from the beginning that we were planning to come to Seattle. And so we're like, all right, we're going to, go start a church in Seattle. We both feel this already that this is something that God is calling us to do. So we end up moving to Oklahoma. And I'm like, Oklahoma is definitely a far cry from Seattle, Washington. But, that's okay. It's all part of the journey. And, we wanted to do what God wanted us to do, and we felt like that was the door he opened at the time. And we were there for about a year or so, and then we finally get to move, and we moved to Tennessee. So, still not Washington. And we had continued to, test the doors. We put out applications for jobs and just whatever we could to see when God was going to open the door
Sure.
here in Seattle. And of course, my family lives in Washington, so every time we would come home, of course, you
Feeling
just
that tug.
yes, yeah, for sure. And so we would, my husband even would come and just walk the streets of Seattle. He'd
Mm,
have us drop him off downtown and, just say, I'll call you when I want you to come pick me up.
wow.
So we did that for a while and we were in Tennessee for about 3 years. So total of 5 years after we were married before God finally opened the door for us to come to Seattle. And when he did, it was so fast that we were just like I don't know, our heads were kind of spinning because we were in a 3-day revival and during our time in Tennessee, we didn't have pretty much anything. We moved there right
Yeah,
as like a big plant had closed down, and we were working for the church, volunteering for the church in their youth
sure.
ministry and music ministry. But we didn't have jobs most of the time we were there. We didn't have, I don't even know how we paid our rent every month, honestly. And our rent was only like $390 a month. Like it was so cheap, and I still don't know how we
Yeah.
how we paid it. Um, but anyway, so we didn't have anything and we were struggling and kind of a long story short, during that time my husband taught himself how to do marketing online and he taught himself about blogging and like
Okay.
all of this stuff because he was like people are making money online,
Oh, yeah.
surely I can figure this out. Just because we had to do something. So during that 3-day revival, we finally got confirmation. Like one of the nights, God said, "Okay, it's time to go," and we were like,
Wow.
"Oh, now?" And He was like, "Now." So within 3 days, we
Wow.
had packed up everything we had. We'd had a garage sale. We got in our car. We both had interviews in the Seattle area. And but we didn't have enough money to even make it to Seattle. So we set off driving and, part of the way there, somebody ended up handing us money, and that got us the rest of the way to Washington.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, and so we finally made it to Seattle, and once we got here, God has really just opened door after door after door, including all of the things that my husband self-taught himself to do is what got him his first job and has allowed us to actually live and work in a city where the cost of living is
So high.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Wow, there's so much to unpack with that story, and I know you were trying to make it condensed down for the sake of this podcast, but the fact someone handed you money halfway on your journey there to get you the rest of the way,
Yeah.
there's just tons of huge moments throughout that trip.
Yes, and It's so funny too. So we end up, here in Seattle, and once I got here, I'd already been writing and stuff a lot. I started writing as a kid as far as
Okay.
songwriting goes,
Yeah.
mainly because, when I started playing for church at 13, I was like, "I need altar call songs," and half the time, these preachers were preaching messages, and I was like, "I have nothing for that." So I would just make stuff up and sing that for
Oh,
altar call.
wow.
So that's really where I got a lot of practice in. So fast forward, once we moved to Seattle, I decided I'm gonna like pursue this in a much bigger way. And so I started like attending retreats and reading books and just, I was like, I want to do this. And I honestly thought I want to do this for other artists. I
Sure.
want other
Yeah.
people to record my songs. I wasn't planning to
Oh,
record
yeah.
them myself at the time.
Wow.
Um, but I was gonna say once we got, to Seattle and I started pursuing this artistry or songwriting journey in a much bigger way. You were talking about just all of the little moments along the way to even get us to Seattle.
Yeah.
The scripture that really just has played over and over and over in my mind these days about all of those moments leading up to just where I'm at right now is Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart, lean not to your own understanding. In all of your ways, acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. Um, and that has really, looking back, been like the key thing over our
Yeah.
lives. And even with the music thing, like I had no idea way back, at especially at, elementary ages, I guess.
Sure.
But even starting off on the songwriting journey, I had no idea that music and my music ministry was going to play such a huge role in us adding to our family of all things. Like I
Mm.
never would have connected those dots.
Right.
Um, and yet, God was moving all of these pieces and planning all of these details to get us to a point where, we were able to add to our family last year, which is a crazy story in and of itself. And we'll get there.
Yes.
Um,
We're
but
excited.
so backing up to the songwriting and kind of getting involved in the music part of things, really I like I said, I started pursuing the writing thing in a more serious way. I even went to Nashville several times for
Okay.
songwriting things, and then I
Wow.
realized, like, unless you're living in Nashville,
Yeah.
you're really not going to be able to break into writing, especially for other artists, because it's out of sight, out of mind. And a lot of people want to write with people who are in the room, and they
Right.
want to write with people who are credible.
Wow.
And, I was a newbie, so it's really hard to prove I'm a credible writer when I'm not even there.
Sure.
So I realized if I was going to do this, I was gonna have to start recording my own music. Um, and so I did, and, I ended up taking a step of faith really and calling a producer, to get a quote. And I say a step of faith because I wanted God to come sit down next to me again, like he did with the Bible college thing, and say, "Yes, Brittany,
This
I
is
want
what
you
you're
to
supposed
record
to
this." I want you to write and produce and release music, and it's going to be great, and you're not going to be in debt. And,
Right.
because those things are expensive. And I
Yeah.
was like, man, I know what it's like to be pinching pennies. And I was like, I do not want to spend, thousands of dollars on recording and releasing this music and it not come back, which for the most part, it's usually hard to recoup
Yeah.
any cost, associated with that. So I decided, okay, I'm just going to start testing the doors, which again, kind of like what we did with Seattle. We're just going to keep testing. And then if God wants to open the right door, we'll walk through it. So
Sure.
I started testing the doors and I called and got a quote from a producer that I had met while I was in Nashville.
Okay.
And he's not from Nashville. He's in Georgia, but he happened to be there for a writing event. And we just really connected. And I felt like the quote he gave me, I was like, let's just do 4 songs. How much would that cost? And I was like, I think that is manageable. I think we can do that. And at least just give this a try and see what happens. And that turned into the Fight For Us EP.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that was in 2018. I released Fight For Us. And yeah, that title track song actually is what took off, which was so funny to me because I thought it would be one of the least liked songs on that
Sure.
project. I
And
was
it
like, it's so youthy, and I just don't know,
yeah,
I don't know if the church would do it,
as
you know, I,
worship song, like, in
yes.
their normal service. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Oh, that's
wow, I
funny.
was surprised because that ended up being like the song.
Yes. Oh, we
Um,
sang it. We had a girls group that sang it.
that is awesome.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, that kind of took off, and then that really confirmed to me, okay, there is something to this,
Yeah,
God definitely has, um, given me the ability to write, and he's using these songs now. So I want to make sure to keep using that, for the kingdom.
absolutely.
And even for us, I was like, I want to be writing and releasing songs that are going to speak over our church and our city and
Wow.
what we're doing right here. So
Yeah,
even going into the studio that first time, I was like, this is where I'm coming from. These are the songs I want to write. I want to remind, the church who God is and how powerful he is, because those are things that I can sing over our ministry and
yeah.
over our church and over our city. Like
Wow.
just being able to sing out those attributes of God and how, powerful and amazing that he is. And I wanted to remind the church of who we are
Yeah.
in him, like that we can be bold. We
Wow.
have power and authority. So, and still to this day, those two thoughts are really what kind of shapes the songs that I'm writing. Those are the two ideas
Yeah.
that the songs really come from. Um,
That's so incredibly cool and inspiring. And I do have a question as you're navigating this new world of songwriting and going to Nashville and kind of met up with that producer. When it was time for you to write the song and then record it, you mentioned how you wanted to write for other people to use your music and to sing your music. When
mhm.
did that switch happen that you realized, no, I need to sing my own music that I'm writing?
I think probably after that second trip that I took, I went for it was like a songwriting boot camp, and you were
Okay,
getting to write with the pros.
so
So
good.
they brought in professionals that this is what they do for a living, and they do it every day. And I also got to meet with a publisher at the time.
Okay,
And so I got to present some songs that I had written to the publisher, and then um, just being in the room with those writers and stuff, I just started realizing, like, I'm not for one, I'm never gonna move here. This is not
right,
where my calling is. My calling is in Seattle, and anything that's gonna take me away from that is gonna be a big no.
sure,
So, I was like, if I'm not gonna move here and just really be with these people all the time, like, it's not gonna work. And then I also realized that I might not want to write that style of music because
yeah,
a lot of it is not as gospel, or, the apostolic movement has a sound. And it's
yeah,
not that we don't have people that write and record in all genres, but there is still a sound when it comes to our like worship music. And that sound doesn't necessarily, show up on the radio or,
yeah, yeah,
any of that. And so,
that's so
um,
true.
yeah, so I just realized, like, probably I need to shift gears and actually just record my own music. And again, just so that like I can prove that I am a good writer, that I
Sure,
am a songwriter. I'm not just dabbling in something.
yeah, yeah,
But like I'm a legitimate writer. And if these songs do well, then that's going to support my claim that,
right.
hey, I'm a songwriter. And thankfully now I've actually written for other people and
Awesome,
churches and groups. And so I am getting to do that because they look at what I've put out on my
right.
own
Yeah,
and they can see now, like, okay, that's somebody we would want to write for us. So it ended up working out in my favor.
that is so cool. And so my next question would be, the name of this podcast is called The Skirted Professional, and you are a professional in this music setting where you're walking in to record, and I'm assuming, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but who your producer is, who you're recording with, they're probably not all apostolics.
Correct.
So, as an apostolic female who chooses to dress differently, hold herself in a different manner, walking into the studio, did you, number one, how was that? And then number two, did you have to fight for yourself with your sound and your mission? Did you have to sell that at all to them?
So thankfully, no, because my producer is awesome, and he wants me. For one, they are very faithful to their church, and he only records Christian music.
Awesome.
Um, but he wants me to be true to who I am, and
Yeah.
understands that there is power to that authenticity, me being who I am, looking like I am supposed to look,
Sure.
acting like I'm supposed to look.
Yeah.
Um, those things show up in the music that we create,
Yeah. Yeah.
anointing for one, and the consecration and commitment of the lifestyle that I live is going to
Sure.
show up, and it does show up in a big way, in the studio and when we're singing, and God moves in the studio, and
Wow.
the anointing will fall in the studio, when there's moments where you're crying because of either a song that you've written or just the moment that you've recorded this,
Yeah.
vocal track, and, you just know that God has shown up. So, thankfully, that hasn't, been, an issue. Obviously, the cool part is that it's noticeable.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
so the more and more that people notice and they notice that I'm the same, that I don't change,
Yeah.
I have been consistent, I will continue to be consistent, that means that eventually they start asking questions, and questions have been asked, and it's given me opportunity, and even some friends opportunity that are connected to the same people, like, "Hey, so and so was asking this," or whatever, and I love hearing that because I know that we're showing up and we're staying, true to who we are, our apostolic identity. And honestly, the way that I dress has I've had more people, especially at live events. There's a couple of things when it comes to doing live events or ministering outside of my church. So on a live stage or platform, which is what we would call it, I've had people come up and thank me for being completely holy
Yeah.
apostolic in the
Sure.
way that I present myself.
Awesome.
And I think part of it is there is a little bit of a fear when it comes to music,
Yeah.
going at it from a professional standpoint, I guess, that we're going to chase just anything else that comes along that looks like a limelight or, spotlight, whatever. And when we show up and we look holy and we look apostolic and our apostolic identity is very clear, it lets people trust us.
Yeah.
And there's this trust, okay, that I can let my young people look up to you, or I can, our girls can look to you and I don't have to worry about it. So I've
Right.
had multiple people come and thank me. And it's like, I don't even know how to respond to that usually. Like, you're welcome. Like, I'm not going to do anything different. This is who I am.
Here I
But I'm glad that, that makes you feel
It's
safe.
recognized. Yeah.
Yeah, and even just for pastors to know, like, you can
Yeah.
trust me with your platform. You don't have to worry about what I'm going to look like.
Sure.
It's something that can be trusted.
And I love
So,
that, as apostolic music, it seems like within the last couple years, it's just exploding where we are having artists write their own music. And that's predominantly what we're trying to trend towards, only singing at large gatherings and conferences in
yes.
support of our apostolic artists, which is unbelievably awesome. Um, but, thinking of you in that studio, and I would love to be a fly on the wall with those non-apostolic people in the room, just listening to that music, and they feel the difference between what you're singing and maybe the person they were recorded previously. And I love that you said the apostolic music has a sound. I
Yeah.
think that's so powerful.
Yeah. I do too, and I think it's something we need to keep in mind that,
Yeah.
I love that our churches are starting to use our songs,
Yeah.
and I think, hopefully they'll continue to do that, but there is like a special anointing on what our apostolic artists are producing. Um, and part of it is because it is like the sound. There is
Yeah.
something special about that sound. And
Absolutely.
yeah, it's
And
really cool.
you're busting open wide the career path, the ministry path, they're kind of one and the same here.
Yeah.
But you're proving you can venture into this creative outlet and still maintain your identity. And like you said, you are
Yes.
proving that you can be an artist and be trustworthy, and you're not just going to tote the line all the time. That there are apostolic artists who can have success and, whatever we call it, fame, the platform, the stage, the performance, but it's just who I am, and I'm walking through the doors God's opening for me.
Yes. Actually, I was having a conversation with another artist friend, and we were talking about this idea of, there can be this idea of like, well, how do I get my music outside of our church, outside of the four walls of our church? I want to
Mm,
make a bigger impact outside of our church. And honestly, like my initial thought was, for one, that can be a dangerous mindset to have because it could eventually lead to you compromising just so that you can do
sure.
what you consider is outside of the walls of our church.
Hmm.
But if you want to reach people on the outside of our church or outside the four walls of the apostolic movement, every time a church sings one of your songs and somebody has walked through that door that is a first time guest, or, somebody walks in and is touched by that song and they're not even a part necessarily of that church. Maybe they've never experienced, an apostolic service before. That is reaching somebody
Yeah.
that was outside, like we're still making an impact by serving the church and that local congregation and providing something for, services, or maybe it's, campus ministry, they're
Yeah.
using those songs, or maybe it's at a P7 club that they're using those songs. Like we can't get into this mindset that unless we're, doing something,
Yes.
outside
Right.
of this box that we're calling our apostolic movement, that we're not reaching beyond our own church, because the people that we're serving are reaching outside of the walls
Yeah.
as they're witnessing and, teaching Bible studies and starting these P7 clubs and campus ministry, or a foreign mission field, or whatever,
Yeah.
starting home missions churches. Like they're doing the job of reaching, and if they're using our music to do it, then boom, you've been successful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so funny you mentioned campus ministry. I have a heart for that. My brother has actually been the campus ministry international leader for a decade. He actually just stepped down. And so I was one that would go to his college campus. I wasn't even a college student yet. And he would have a classroom, reserved, ready for us to go there. And I would go help sing, and we just have an acoustic set, just really simple. But the melting pot of nationalities and countries in that one room, when you
Yeah,
say thinking outside the four walls of the church, it could be global in 1 second of that song being sung in the right room with
absolutely.
tons of nations represented and college campuses and our schools. I mean, that is the prime place for that to happen.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's so inspiring, so inspiring. So, okay, moving on here. You mentioned that you were able to add to your family through music and how it's kind of tied in other parts of your life. We'd love to dive in and hearing about maybe if you have kids of your own, or the process of how you added to your family.
Absolutely. So, going back to that first EP I put out,
Huh?
it all kind of links together. That first step of faith, like I said, I had no idea that it was going to lead to us adding to our family, which we did in November of this last year.
Oh,
We
congratulations.
brought home a baby girl,
Oh,
and yeah, we've just been completely in love, and
wow.
needing a little more sleep, but other than that, we're we're having the time of our lives.
Aw.
And but after taking that step of faith and not realizing, okay, there's something to this, I decided the next year to record another project. And I guess I don't know if you would call me a dreamer. Maybe I do tend to like just think, well, what if we did this? What if we could do this? And
Yeah.
sometimes that can be great, sometimes that might not be so great, but
Annoying.
um
I've told I'm annoying at times.
yeah. So I thought, what would be cool? One of the ideas that I had, thankfully it panned out, was like, what if we do an apostolic tour?
So cool.
Excuse me. So I thought they have all of these musical concerts and tours and stuff like that, that they do. And funny enough, I've never been to any of them. So I don't know what I was thinking, but I was like, I've seen advertisements for like winter jam, I
Yeah,
guess. Was like, why don't we have something like that? For one, it provides a platform for our apostolic artists, so they're not having to go try to get on a winter jam stage,
sure, sure.
and hopefully help us to keep them in the church
Awesome.
because they're having opportunity in the church. And then two, it gives our, young people and young adults really something to go to that is our artists and our music.
Yeah.
Introducing them maybe to artists in our movement that they haven't heard. And so I ended up reaching out to Court Chavis,
Mhm.
and I was like, hey, I have this idea. And, I figured having him along would help bring, again, some credibility to
Sure.
what we were doing, because he's been in this a long time and he's been doing the music thing. And, young people love him
Yes.
as well because of, for many reasons.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I was like, what do you think? And would you want to be a part? And he was immediately like, I think it's great. Let's do it. So I was
Awesome.
like, okay. So then I was like, we're gonna need at least one more artist. just starting kind of smaller. We're not gonna go quite full winter jam yet because I
Yes.
don't think we can afford that, but, I was like, "If we had one more artist, I think that would be great," and I had seen this video floating around on Facebook, and the song in the video was "Wait on the Lord,"
Hmm.
and I was like I didn't know who James Wilson was. I wasn't at the NAYC where he was a part of it,
Yeah.
so I literally had no idea who he was. I just
Wow.
was like, "I like this song. He's about to release some more music, um, and so maybe I'll call him." So
Put him
I
on
ended up
tour.
tracking yeah. I tracked down his contact info and called and was like, "Hey, you don't know me, but, I saw your song, and I know you're about to come out with some more music. This was this idea I had." This was this idea I had, to do, like, an apostolic tour, and Court Chavis is already on board. Would you wanna be a part of it? And he was like, "Yes." He's like, "We were actually just talking about how we could maybe do some type of tour with this, new music that I'm releasing."
So
So
cool.
he was like, "Perfect timing." So from there, we just launched out and began Battle Cry Tour.
Wow.
So we did Battle Cry Tour in 2019, and it was awesome. Like, I don't know, God again just blew my mind with everything he did with it. It was beyond what I could have imagined, and, so I was like, "We'll definitely do this again."
Yeah.
And so we tried in 2020, and of course, we ended up in a pandemic,
Yeah.
so that kind of shut the door because we weren't doing as much, when it came to, crowded indoor events without
Sure.
we can't social distance and get enough people in there to cover the cost of a
Right.
tour because,
Yeah, that's
you know
true.
yeah, I have had people, like, kinda ask about the whole, "You're charging for tickets," kind of thing, and I'm like, "Well, if you understand
It
that
is.
to go on tour, it costs us at least $30,000 usually, and then
Wow.
depending on how many days we go, that just goes up from there."
Yeah.
So, it's about $30,000 for, like, 3 stops.
Wow.
So we have to be able to cover the cost of
Yeah,
that,
sure.
and we don't wanna pass all of that cost on to our host churches either
Right.
because that's a lot to
That's a
ask,
lot.
but anyway, so we, couldn't do the tour in 2020. We ended up pushing it off till 2021.
Mhm.
I can't believe it's 2022,
And
so I have to, like, keep reminding myself what years.
and we're halfway through February.
I
It
know,
tells
it's
me.
crazy.
Yeah.
So, anyways, we ended up doing the tour in 2021, and we came to St. Louis, which is where you're at.
Yeah.
Um, but on this tour, I had written this song, um, and this is where it kind of like all these little pieces start falling into place when it comes to us adding to our family. It's so
Sure.
crazy. So, I had written this song with my friends in Georgia called Never Break a Promise. And a lot of times we write songs more based on like experience, something that I'm pulling from. But every now and then you write something that's just for fun. And sometimes it's because God knows you're about to need it.
Mm.
And that was the case with this song. So we wrote it and we're releasing it in 2020 during all this pandemic stuff. And that same year, we've been on this journey to adopt for about 6 years now,
Wow.
5 or 6. And, in 2020, we were matched with an expectant mom, and, she was having a baby girl, and she was due in September. And the song that I was gonna be releasing, was coming out, I think, at the beginning of October or
Oh,
sometime in October. So,
mm,
um, but I wasn't making any connections at the time.
sure.
So we ended up going to Florida when, this expectant mom went into labor, and when we got there, we ended up in a hotel waiting and waiting and waiting because the baby had to, have a stay in the NICU,
Okay.
um, and we couldn't go until, the mom was discharged. We weren't allowed to go to the hospital until that happened, and so we were just waiting, and we waited several days, and then we ended up going and checking into an Airbnb because we're like, "We have no idea how long we're gonna be here."
Right.
There's a lot of stuff that happens after you're able to bring the baby home, or you can't leave the state until,
Hmm.
all of this legal stuff happens. So you can end up in a state for up to, like, 2 weeks sometimes just
Wow.
waiting on, the state to do whatever it needs to do.
Sure.
Anyway, we, checked into an Airbnb, and literally the day we checked in, we'd already, like, paid for it and booked it for, like, I don't know, another week, I think. And, the day we checked in, we got a phone call that the expectant mom had changed her mind
Oh, wow.
and decided to parent. And, obviously great for her that she was able to make
Right.
that decision and felt like that was something she could do. Sad for us
Yeah.
because we had just traveled thousands of miles, spent a lot of money on our hotels, on an Airbnb, um, not to mention all the other money that goes into, having a
Preparing.
contract and
Yeah, sure.
yes. So there's just a lot, that went into it that we lost. And
Uh,
beyond that, the fact that when we came home, we weren't gonna have a baby. It was just gonna be us again. And so we were definitely pretty heartbroken about all of that. And you know,
wow.
God had given us a promise and he'd given us promises over and over. And one of the things early on in our journey that he'd ask us to do was to take a step of faith. It's always that step of faith,
Always
and to buy a stroller or car seat
awesome.
and that he would fill it. So we had done that and we had taken that faith, it's actually a stroller car seat combo. So
Yeah.
I never know what to call it, but I'll say stroller. So we had taken that faith stroller with us to Florida
Wow.
and ended up taking it back home with nothing
Nothing
in
in
it.
it. Hmm.
It was empty. And so there was just that heartbroken. I remember walking back into our apartment, and that was probably one of the hardest things that we had to do,
Mm.
was to walk back into our apartment and nothing had changed.
Yeah.
Like, we were prepared for everything in our lives to change, and here we were, no baby, pushing that empty stroller back home, back into the nursery where it was gonna sit empty.
Wow.
And right after that is when I released the song "Never Break a Promise," and it just kinda clicked for me, "Okay, God, you knew I was gonna need this reminder that even though I don't have the promise right now, and even though we just went through this heartbreak, it doesn't mean that you're not a promise keeper.
Right.
You're going to come through."
Wow.
And so on tour in 2021, as much as I wanted God to give me a baby before that tour happened so I could stand up there, sing that song, and show off a baby and say, "Look, God never breaks a promise," that didn't happen, and I had to share the story I just shared with you
Wow.
every single night before I sang that song. Little did I know that one night I was going to get up and sing it on a Friday night, and somebody was going to hear my story, and a few days later, before I could even make it home from tour, like, I had not been home yet. I was gonna get a phone call that said, "I've never had this happen before. We've been pastoring this church for, like, I don't know, over 30 years, I think. And, I just got a phone call that we have a baby girl that was born last night, and I heard your testimony. I can't get you off of my mind. Do you guys want to come?"
Wow.
And so
Wow.
we, of course, ended up saying yes.
Unbelievable.
And, within 24 hours, I was holding of her being born, I was holding our baby girl.
Oh my
And
goodness.
yeah, it's just been, I'm older. I'm in my 30s, so an older first-time mom, I guess. I know there's a lot more people, in their 30s now that are
Yeah.
just starting families and
Yeah.
stuff, but, I think one of the blessings of that is I was just like, "I am going to enjoy every
Yes.
moment and,
Yeah.
just, soak it up because everybody talks about how fast it goes, and even the sleepless nights are not gonna be forever, and
Wow.
we really have enjoyed it. I was telling my husband last night again as I was carrying an armful of her laundry to the washing machine, like, being a mom is really, I love it, like, it's great.
Aw.
It's not that it's always easy,
Yeah.
and when you're half asleep and you're exhausted and stuff, you can get a little like, "Oh my goodness, what is going on?
Sure, yeah.
I'm so tired, I just need you to sleep right now." So yes, those moments are definitely real, but at the same time, like, even in those moments and you look down and see that little face and go, "I cannot believe how God wrote this
Wow.
story and worked it out to bring her into our lives." Like, again, going back to that scripture, "Trust in the Lord with all of your heart, lean not to your own understanding." If I had done things my own way and the way that I thought was gonna be the best, like, this story would have never happened, and honestly, it wouldn't have had the impact that
Right.
it has had
Right.
because it would have been a blessing to us and nobody else would have really been blessed by it.
And the fact that you got up night after night on that tour and just spoke what God told you to speak of it doesn't matter if I don't have the baby in my hands right now, he is still a promise keeper. And you're
Yeah.
right. I'm encouraged by it just listening to it right here, but I can't imagine sitting in that audience and thinking about everyone who had a promise that was given to them that they were just it was being reminded to them and they were clinging to it. And
Yeah.
then what a cool testimony for you to now then have the baby in your arms and it's a double testimony. If that's
Yes.
possible, it's we can be
You're
blessed
absolutely
twice
right.
by it, you know? It's a double blessing.
Yeah, and that's the truth. Because honestly, when we started, doing this tour and I started telling that story every night, I honestly thought, "Okay, this is why we went through that."
Yeah.
It's because there are people who are hurting, there are people that need to be reminded to hold on to your promise, hold on to your promise, and when they can look at me and I can say, "I know exactly where you're at, I don't have it yet,
Yeah.
but I'm still holding on and you can hold on too."
Wow.
Like, that's an encouragement, and I thought, "Okay, God, okay, like, it was worth it if this is what you were doing,"
Yeah.
and I had no clue that I was about to receive because of that. I
Yeah.
had no clue, so in my mind, I thought, "Well, this was the purpose because there was, trust me, so many nights where I just, "God, I do not understand. Why
Yeah.
take us through the heartache?
Sure.
Like, what was the purpose in that, and how are you going to," I don't see any good coming from it. At the
Wow.
time, I didn't. And for months and months later, I still didn't.
Yeah.
And just to encourage anybody else who's listening, seeing that person up there giving the testimony, sometimes we think like, "Man, I couldn't have that kind of faith or I couldn't get up and do that." Well, trust me, what you don't see is the tears
Yeah.
and the disappointment and the frustration and me crying out to God and sometimes me even not even having the words
Yeah.
because I just didn't know what else to pray. And the grief, like the actual
Yes.
grief and just going like, "God, I don't know what to do other than to tell you I'm hurt, I'm
Yeah.
disappointed, I am grieving." I like it was a actual loss.
Wow.
It was a loss of what was supposed to be.
Yes. Yeah.
So on the flip side of that, I have this saying that there are no super Christians, there are only faithful ones. So trust me, if you'll just be faithful, you don't have to label yourself or other people as some
Yes.
super Christian that has this great faith that you'll never be able to match because trust me, that was not me either.
Yeah.
It's just that I had made up my mind tomorrow I'm going to get up and I'm going to keep living for God. Tomorrow I'm going to
Yeah.
get up and I'm going to keep trusting. Like I'm not going to change. I'm not going to change the way I live. I'm not going to give up on living for God, even if He never brings that promise to pass. Like I just had already made up in my mind. And that's what it takes is just being faithful,
Yes.
being faithful.
Seems like our conversation is circling back even to the beginning of being
Yes.
faithful in those small things. And, it's almost like, and we see several Bible characters used in this way where, of course, they're elevated in our minds now because they're recorded in this amazing book that we get to read. But in those moments where they didn't know that that was going to be told years down the road, and they didn't know that that was going to be some faith story, it was just their life and they were just living it. And so
Right.
imagining the hurt that you're going through and that you allowed God to produce healing through your hurt and
Yeah.
healing to people sitting in the audience. And, Brittany, I have to believe that while you were hurting and while you were sharing that testimony, God was healing you too. You were
He
willing to
was.
open up that wound constantly and be vulnerable. And He's healing you through that process of you being vulnerable.
You are absolutely right.
And that, to me, that is just, there's nothing more of, God, here I am, use me. I'm going to go through the grief. I'm going to be sad because sometimes it's just okay to be sad and to not be
Yeah.
okay. But however you can use this, use it. I'm a vessel.
Yeah.
And I feel that so strongly with your story. And, I, on Instagram, I saw your video circulate and I had no idea anything about your background or anything about your music background. I mean, I know your songs and your tour and didn't have a clue about the adoption journey. And I'm sure only people closest to you really do. But to see that inspiring video take off, and I just sat there with tears weeping, just weeping with
Mm.
you and in the joy and, being on this side of it now, you do have the baby in your arms. But for
Yeah.
those people that are in your situation that you were in a couple months ago, it's so empowering to hear, just keep having faith, just keep working through it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's
God is faithful.
He is. Yeah, that's very powerful. So let's wrap some of this up. If you had a life message, I think you've given us so many nuggets of wisdom throughout this entire episode, but to sum things up, do you feel like you have a life message or a purpose that God has instilled in you to share with others?
Yeah. So I feel like there can be so much, because it just depends on the season. But I would say, again, in the season that I'm in right now, it just goes back to that scripture. And I've already shared it a couple of times. But if you will truly trust in the Lord with all of your heart,
Yeah.
lean not to your own understanding, in all of your ways acknowledge Him, He will direct your path and He will do it in a way that you just could never even imagine. Like
Right.
he is able to work details on us, like a level beyond us, many levels beyond us,
Yeah.
and beyond our understanding. And just like it hurts my brain sometimes to look back and go, if I had never taken this step of faith,
Yeah.
then I wouldn't have done this. And if I hadn't done this, I wouldn't have got here. And if I hadn't been here, then I wouldn't have ended up on that platform the night that somebody needed to hear because there was a little girl waiting on me. Like, and that's like, I just made that into like 4 or 5 steps when it's really like thousands
Sounds
upon thousands.
yeah.
And it's like, in my own understanding, I cannot manipulate life to make that happen, to make that work.
Yeah.
But if I trust him, I'm trusting in a God that is beyond, amazing. And his ways are so much further above our
Oh,
ways,
yeah.
and all of that. And if
True.
I trust him, like he's able to
Yeah.
put detail after detail after detail into place. And I look back and go, wow, like I'm just amazed at everything that God has done.
Yes.
Using the good and the bad, the happy times and the hurting times, like all of it to write the story that is going to be best for me and also is going to bring him glory and make an impact in his kingdom.
So true. He is the logistical master. That's what
Yes.
I like to coin him. You can take the most logistical person in the world that you know who is so detail oriented, and he just far surpasses that person and individual. And I'm thankful that he is a detail oriented God and meets us right in that moment where we need that
Yes.
detail. So I think that's so inspiring. Your whole story has been a blessing to me, and I know our listeners are going to truly enjoy hearing more about your story. Brittany, we do have a question that we ask at the end of every podcast, and it's just kind of a fun, whatever comes to your brain first is kind of the answer you want to go with. But we want to know, in this season of your life, what is saving your life right now?
Well, this might be one of those like silly um sappy kind of responses. But honestly, I have to say my husband.
Oh, yeah.
He has been, like, so amazing. We brought home, like I said, a baby girl, and, that's a brings out a lot of a lot of
Oh,
changes
sure.
and stuff in your life and your routine and all of that, and just the way that he has jumped in. He's the one that's keeping her right now just so I can do this podcast,
Awesome.
and, he thankfully he's able to help with like feeding and getting up in the night and stuff like that too. And he has like he's jumped in to do so much and help so much, and honestly I could not be doing this without him,
Sure.
so I've got to say Ryan.
Oh, that's a great answer. Great answer. A lot of our answers have been coffee, which is, of course, a great answer.
Well, I don't drink coffee,
But
so if I did it might be the
yeah,
answer.
but the husband works too. The husband
Yeah.
works too. Well, Brittany, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy day. We know you're in a crazy season of life right now, and we just really appreciate the wisdom that you shared with us. And we look forward to this episode being live.
Well, thank you so much.